Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you, honey. The gold embossed Christmas invitation sat on my kitchen counter and tucked beneath. It was my mother's handwritten note telling me not to come for the sake of everyone. They thought I was just an unimportant designer who did not belong in their elite circle. But at 11:59 p.m., their television flickered to life, and the room froze when my lawyer announced that the controlling shareholder was me. Midnight was only the beginning. My name is Savannah Rivera, and for the last 10 years, I have existed in my family like a watermark on a photograph. I am there visible if you tilt the paper at the right angle, but I am not the subject, I am certainly not the art. This reality became undeniable on a Tuesday afternoon in early December when the Postal Service delivered a cream-colored envelope to my mailbox. It was heavy stock paper, the kind that costs $4 a sheet, embossed with gold leaf, that caught the sterile light of my kitchen. Inside was a formal invitation to the annual Rivera Christmas Eve dinner. The typography was elegant, likely a custom serif my mother had spent 3 weeks selecting. It looked perfect. It looked welcoming. It was a lie. Clipped to the back of the invitation, with a small gold paperclip, was a piece of stationery, smaller and less formal. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my mother's script, sharp and angular, the letters leaning forward as if they were trying to run away from the words they formed. Savannah, please do not come. It is best for everyone. There was no signature. There was no explanation. Just 10 words that dismantled my holiday plans with the efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. I stood in my kitchen, my fingers tracing the indentation of the gold letters on the main invitation. The main card was a prop, something sent so they could tell themselves they had invited me. The note was the order. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop. It was a message from Sienna, my little sister, the golden child, the future Mrs. Logan Kincaid. I picked up the phone. A photograph filled the screen. It was the living room of my parents' sprawling estate in Bend, Oregon. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the snow-covered peaks of the Cascade Mountains. Inside, a 12-root Douglas fir tree stood aggressively decorated in shades of champagne and white. It looked less like a home and more like a spread in a glossy architectural magazine. Underneath the photo was a text message that attempted to be gentle but felt like sandpaper. Asav mentioned she sent the invite before we finalized the head count. This year is going to be really tight. Just a small gathering with the Kincaids to discuss the wedding details. We are keeping it super low profile. We will do a sister's lunch in January. Okay, love you. I placed the phone down next to the note. The coordination was impressive. Alm played the bad cop with her handwritten banishment, and Sienna played the good cop with her soft, digital rejection. I felt a sensation that was familiar to me. It was not anger. Anger implies a sudden heat, a reaction to an injustice. This was colder. It was the feeling of being erased. I was not being yelled at. I was not being disowned in a dramatic shouting match. I was simply being edited out of the script because my character no longer served the plot my parents were trying to weave for Graham and Evelyn Rivera. This Christmas was not a holiday. It was an audition. They had moved to Bend 5 years ago, flushed with cash from selling their logistics company in Ohio. Desperate to reinvent themselves, they traded humidity for dry mountain air and sensible sedans for luxury SUVs that had never touched dirt. They wanted to be part of the quiet, luxury set, the people who wore cashmere sweaters that cost $2,000 but had no logos. And the Kincaids were the kings of that world. The Kincaid family did not just live in Bend. They owned the soul of it. They were the founders of Kincaid Micromobility, the brand that had revolutionized green transport in the Pacific Northwest. Their electric cargo bikes were everywhere, ridden by hipsters in Portland and tech executives in Seattle. To my parents, the Kincaids were not just potential in-laws. They were the finish line. If Sienna married Logan Kincaid, my parents would finally be safe. They would be established. They would be real. Logan Kincaid was the face of that dream. I had met him 6 or 7 times. He was undeniably handsome in a way that suggested he had never experienced a moment of true inconvenience in his entire life. He had a smile that was bright enough to sell securities fraud, and he treated Sienna like a very expensive accessory that matched his aesthetic. He was the chief marketing officer of Kincaid Micromobility, the visionary who gave TD talks about sustainability and the future of urban transport. And then there was me, Savannah. I looked around my apartment. It was not a mansion in Bend. It was a 12,200 T unit in a converted warehouse in Portland. It smelled of coffee and acrylic paint. I worked as a senior brand strategist at Juniper and Slate Creative. I spent my days designing identities for other people, fixing their logos, clarifying their messages, and making sure the world saw them exactly how they wanted to be seen. To my parents, I was the artistic daughter in their vocabulary. Artistic was a polite synonym for unsuccessful. They believed I lived paycheck to paycheck. They believed I drove a 6-year-old Subaru because I could not afford a Range Rover. They believed I was single because I was too difficult, too sharp, too unwilling to bend my knees to the social hierarchy they warped. They were wrong about almost everything. I walked over to the window and looked out at the gray Portland sky. Rain streaked the glass. My reflection ghosted back at me. I was 34 years old. I had my mother's eyes, but my father's stubborn jawline. I did not look like the victim of a family tragedy. I looked tired, yes, but steady. The truth was I did not care about their parties. I hated the way the air in their house always smelled of cinnamon pine cones and desperation. I hated the way my father laughed too loud at Graham Kincaid's jokes. I hated watching Sienna shrink herself down to fit into the pocket of a man who loved his reflection more than he would ever love her. But this note was different. Savannah, please do not come. It was the finality of it. They were not just ashamed of me. They were afraid of me. They viewed me as a liability. They were terrified that I would say the wrong thing, wear the wrong dress, or perhaps just exist too loudly and shatter the illusion of perfection they had built for the Kincaids. They wanted a floorless tableau for Christmas Eve, and I was the cracked tile they needed to cover with a rug. I walked back to the kitchen counter and picked up the note again. I ran my thumb over the paper. There was a secret I kept in the quiet spaces of my life. It was a secret that sat in a bank account my parents did not know existed under the name of a limited liability company they had never heard of. It was a secret born 11 years ago, nurtured in silence and grown into something massive. My family saw a graphic designer who made decent money but lacked ambition. They saw a woman who was content to stay on the sidelines. They had no idea that I was not on the sidelines. They had no idea that I was the one who had built the stadium they were playing in. For years, I had watched Kincaid Micromobility from a distance. I knew things about their supply chain that Logan Kincaid likely did not know. I knew about the debt restructuring they had done 4 years ago. I knew about the patent disputes they had settled out of court. I knew these things not because I was a stalker, but because I was an investor, a very specific, very aggressive type of investor who hid behind layers of corporate anonymity. I had spent the last decade buying every time the Kincaid stock dipped because of a recall or a bad quarter. I was there when they needed a bridge loan to cover a cash flow gap. My shell company provided it. I had done it initially to protect Sienna's future, to ensure that the empire she was marrying into did not collapse, but over time it had become something else. It had become leverage. I looked at the note again. It is best for everyone. They thought I was the poor relation. They thought I was the stain on their reputation. They did not know that the only reason the lights were on in the Kincaid headquarters was because I had paid the bill. I opened the drawer of my kitchen island. It was the drawer where I kept things I did not need, but could not throw away: batteries, rubber bands, old keys to apartments I no longer rented. I placed my mother's handwritten note inside. It lay there against the wood, white and stark. It felt like a paper cut on the webbing between my thumb and index finger. It was not a mortal wound. It was not gushing blood, but it stung. It throbbed with a low, dull ache that traveled up my arm and settled in my chest. They wanted me gone. They wanted me to be invisible so they could secure their place in the hierarchy of Bend, Oregon. They wanted to sell Sienna to the Kincaids without the embarrassment of the older, unsuccessful sister looming in the background. I closed the drawer. The sound was a sharp snap in the quiet apartment. I walked to the hallway and grabbed my coat. It was a long charcoal wool coat, minimalist, structured, expensive, though my mother would never recognize the brand because it did not scream its name from a logo on the chest. I was not going to stay home. I was not going to eat takeout Chinese food and watch holiday movies alone while they toasted to their success. I was going to go. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to flip the table or throw wine in Logan's face. That was not my style. I was simply going to attend the dinner to which I had been invited. I was going to sit in the chair they did not want to offer me. I wanted to see it. I wanted to look them in the eyes. I wanted to see the exact moment they realized that I was not just a prop they could discard. I wanted to measure the distance between us. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go to keep their facade intact. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see if they could recognize the hand that fed them, even if that hand was currently holding a set of car keys and trembling just slightly with a rage that had been cold brewed for 10 years. I checked my reflection one last time. I looked calm. I looked professional. I looked like Savannah Rivera, the designer. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. I picked up my purse and walked out the door. The drive to Bend was 3 hours through the mountains. The roads would be icy. The visibility would be poor, but I knew the way. I had been navigating treacherous paths involving my family for my entire life. This was just one more mountain to climb. They wanted a silent night. They wanted a perfect night. I would give them my presence, and I would bring my silence with me. But silence, as they were about to learn, is heavy. And sometimes when you drop it in a room full of glass, it shatters everything. The road beneath my tires was slick with a fresh layer of freezing rain, forcing me to drive well below the speed limit. The rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers acted like a metronome, ticking backward through time, to understand why the note in my pocket burned with such a specific, ironic heat. One has to understand the money. Not the family money my parents pretended to have or the old money the Kincaids actually had, but the money nobody knew existed. It began 11 years ago. I was 23 years old, fresh out of design school, and working the junior position that barely paid my rent. That was the year my grandmother passed away. She was the only person in my family who saw me clearly and in her will. She left me a modest inheritance. It was $142,000 to my parents, who were busy leveraging their assets to buy a vacation home they could not afford. It was a cute amount. A down payment on a starter home, a new car, a nice cushion. They urged me to buy a condo. They told me to be sensible. Instead, I did something that would have terrified them. I rented a tiny studio apartment, ate instant noodles, and I started reading financial prospectuses with the same obsession I applied to typography. I was looking for something broken that deserved to be fixed. That was when I found Kincaid Micromobility. Back then, the Kincaid name did not carry the weight of royalty and Bend. They were a messy, ambitious startup that had expanded too aggressively into the Seattle market. They had a beautiful product, an electric cargo bike with a frame geometry that was years ahead of the competition. But their supply chain was a disaster. They were bleeding cash. They were drowning in debt to battery suppliers in South Korea. The financial blogs were already writing their obituary, calling them a classic case of rich kids playing manufacturing. I sat in my studio apartment at 2 in the morning, illuminated by the blue glow of my laptop, and I read their filings. I read the footnotes that everyone else skipped. I looked at their patent portfolio. Specifically, I looked at a patent for a regenerative braking integration system that was wildly undervalued. The market saw a company that could not pay its bills. I saw a company that owned a piece of intellectual property that would become the industry standard within 5 years. The core was good. The management was terrible. I knew that if I bought shares under my own name, my father would find out. He would sniff out the money, or worse, he would mock me for throwing my inheritance into a sinking ship. So I created a shield. I filed the paperwork for a limited liability company in Delaware. I named it Hawthorne Meridian LLC. It sounded boring. It sounded institutional. It sounded like a hedge fund run by gray men in gray suits, not a 23-year-old graphic designer in Portland. I started buying. I did not buy all at once. I was a sniper. I waited for the bad news. When Kincaid announced a recall on their handlebars, the stock plummeted to $3.15 a share. I bought 10,000 shares. When they missed their quarterly earnings target by 40%, the price dropped to nearly $2. I poured the rest of my inheritance in. My friends were buying furniture and going on trips to Europe. I was buying a failing bicycle company. For the first 3 years, it was terrifying. There were months where Kincaid Micromobility teetered on the edge of insolvency. I remember a Tuesday in November 8 years ago when they were unable to make payroll. The stock was essentially worthless. I could have lost everything, but I believed in the math. I scraped together every dollar I had saved from my design job, my bonuses, my freelance checks, and Hawthorne Meridian LLC participated in a private placement, a quiet injection of capital that kept the lights on at the Kincaid headquarters. Nobody knew it was me. To the Kincaid board of directors, Hawthorne Meridian was just a silent partner, a mysterious entity that believed in their long-term vision when the banks had turned their backs. Slowly, the tide turned. The market caught up to the technology. The e-bike boom hit the United States. And suddenly, Kincaid was not just a bike company. They were a lifestyle brand. The stock went from $2 to 20, then 50, then 100. I did not sell. I knew the ceiling was higher. By the time Sienna started dating Loban Kincaid 2 years ago, the landscape had shifted entirely. I remember the first time she brought him to dinner. They sat across from me at a trendy restaurant in the Pearl District. Loban was charming, talking about the company's incredible growth and their resilience in the face of market challenges. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had steered the ship through the storm. He had no idea he was sitting across from the lighthouse keeper. I sat there sipping my water, listening to him explain the company's valuation to my father. My father was practically drooling, doing mental math on Loban's net worth. "We have some very loyal institutional investors," Loban had said that night, looking proud. "They have stuck with us since the dark days." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. I was the institutional investor, me, the sister in the corner, wearing the thrifted sweater. At that point, I owned roughly 30% of the voting shares through Hawthorne Meridian and various derivative instruments. I could have spoken up right then. I could have dropped the bomb during the appetizer course. "Actually, Logan, I am the reason you still have a job." But I stayed silent. I stayed silent for Sienna. She was so happy. She looked at Loban like he was the sun, and she looked at the Cade family like they were gods. If I had revealed myself, the dynamic would have shattered. My parents would have pivoted instantly. They would have stopped fawning over Loban and started pressuring me. They would have demanded I use my leverage to get my father a seat on the board. They would have asked for money for cars, for a house in the hills. They would have turned my strategic investment into their personal piggy bank. Worse, they would have hated me for it. They needed me to be the failure so they could feel successful. If I was the winner, their entire worldview would collapse. So I played the role. I continued to drive my old Subaru. I continued to live in my rented apartment. I let them treat me with that specific brand of pity reserved for the family disappointment. Over the last 2 years, however, I noticed something shifting in the Kincaid financials. While Loban and his brother Miles were giving interviews about sustainability, the balance sheet was starting to look heavy again. They were leveraging the company to fund their personal lifestyles. There were acquisition rumors that made no sense. I kept buying every time there was a dip. Hawthorne Meridian was there. I was not just investing anymore. I was fortifying. I knew that eventually the bad management that had almost killed the company a decade ago would return. And when it did, I needed to have enough control to stop them from wrecking the only thing of value they actually possessed. By last week, my total ownership stake had crossed a critical threshold. It was a mathematical tipping point. I looked out at the snowy highway. The heater in my car rattled slightly. My parents thought they were protecting the family's future by excluding me from this dinner. They viewed me as a social liability, a rough edge that needed to be sanded down so they could slide smoothly into the Kincaid machinery. They thought that by banishing me, they were securing the deal. The irony was so sharp, it almost drew blood. They were begging the architect to step out of the building so they could admire the wallpaper. I thought about the note again. It is best for everyone. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea that without me, without Hawthorne Meridian LLC, the Kincaid empire would have been liquidated for scrap metal 6 years ago. Logan would be selling insurance. Miles would be managing a golf course, and my parents would have nobody to impress. I was not going to dinner to brag. I was not going to dinner to ruin Sienna's engagement. I was going because I needed to see the faces of the people who were unknowingly living on my charity. I needed to see if there was any redeemable part of this family left, or if they were all just hollow shells polished to a high shine. I shifted gears as the road began to climb toward the pass. The engine whed in protest. They thought I was the surplus daughter, the extra mouth to feed, the unrefined element. They were about to learn that I was the foundation. I was the walls. I was the roof. And I was holding the thing that kept their entire dream alive. The dashboard clock glowed green. It was 7:45 p.m. I would arrive right on time. I wondered if they had set a place for me or if I would have to pull up a chair. It did not matter. By midnight, seating arrangements would be the least of their problems. The house my parents had purchased in Bend sat on a ridge overlooking the Dashawites River, a sprawling structure of timber and glass that was designed to look like it had grown organically out of the basalt rock. In reality, it was a triumph of expensive engineering. As I turned my car onto the long winding driveway, the property glowed against the dark winter sky. It was not the chaotic multicolored warmth of the Christmas lights from my childhood in Ohio. This was a curated display. Thousands of tiny white LED bulbs wrapped around the aspens and ponderosa pines. Spaced with mathematical precision, it looked less like a family home and more like a high-end wellness retreat or the lobby of a boutique hotel in Zurich. The driveway was already crowded. It was a showroom of European all-wheel drive engineering. There were 2 Range Rovers, one black and one a slate gray that probably cost extra. There was a Porsche Cayenne and a massive Mercedes G-Wagon that looked like it had never encountered a muddy puddle in its life. The vehicles were parked in a herringbone pattern, suggesting a valet had been hired, though I saw no one attending the lot. I drove my 6-year-old Subaru past the parade of six-figure steel. I did not attempt to squeeze into the main parking area. I knew the rules without having to be told. I drove past the garage bays and parked down by the retaining wall near the trash enclosures. It was darker there, hidden from the front door's line of sight. I cut the engine. The silence of the high desert pressed in against the windows. I checked my reflection in the rear-view mirror. I had chosen a black silk blouse and wide-leg trousers. It was elegant, professional, and severe. It was armor. I took a breath, holding a cold air in my lungs for a count of 4, and then stepped out into the snow. The air smelled of wood smoke and money. The front door was a massive slab of walnut that pivoted on a central axis. I did not ring the bell. I simply pressed the handle and pushed. The foyer was warm and smelled intensely of cinnamon, clove, and expensive cedar. It was the scent of a candle that costs $1.80. My mother, Evelyn Rivera, was standing near the entrance to the great room, holding a crystal flute of champagne. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress that draped perfectly over her frame, the kind of outfit that declared she did not do housework, did not cook, and certainly did not stress. She turned as the draft from the door hit her. Her professional hostess smile was already in place, beaming and bright, ready to greet a Kincaid. Then she saw me. The smile did not vanish, which would have been honest. Instead, it froze. The corners of her mouth twitched, caught between the reflex to be polite and the genuine horror of seeing her instructions disobeyed. She lowered the champagne glass just an inch, a subconscious defensive posture. "Oh," she said. The word was flat, landing on the marble floor like a dead bird. "You came." "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said. My voice was steady. I did not move to hug her. I knew that if I stepped forward, she would stiffen, terrified I might wrinkle the cashmere or smudge her makeup. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting toward the living room to see if anyone had noticed. I thought my note was clear. "Savannah, we discussed that this evening was delicate. I was invited," I said, stepping fully inside and closing the door behind me. "And I thought it would be rude to decline a formal invitation from my own parents before she could formulate a rebuttal. My father, Graham Rivera, appeared from the hallway. He looked the part of the country gentleman. He was desperately trying to be tweed jacket, open collar, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. When he saw me, his reaction was different from Mom's. He did not look horrified. He looked annoyed, like a manager whose employee had sewn up for a shift they were not scheduled for. He walked over and extended his hand. He did not open his arms. He offered me his hand the same way he would greet a zoning inspector or a supplier he was trying to lowball. "Savannah," he said, gripping my hand firmly, "we were not expecting you." "Clearly," I said, releasing his hand. It was dried and warm. "The house looks beautiful, Dad." "It is a big night," he said, his eyes already looking over my shoulder, scanning the room for the people who actually mattered. "The Kincaids are here, Miles and Logan, and their parents are arriving in 20 minutes. We need everything to be seamless." Seamless. He repeated the word as a command. Be seamless. Be invisible. Do not exist. "I will be on my best behavior," I said. I walked past them into the great room. The space was magnificent with 20 ceilings and a wall of glass facing the mountains. A fire wrought in the stone hearth. A jazz playlist drifted softly from hidden speakers, instrumental, inoffensive, tasteful. Sienna was standing near the fireplace, laughing at something Logan Kincaid was saying. She looked radiant. She was wearing a shimmering silver dress that caught the firelight. She looked like the princess of the story, the girl who had done everything right. She turned and saw me. The laugh died in her throat. Her eyes widened, and for a split second I saw panic. It was a heartbreaking look. It was not that she hated me. It was that she was terrified I was a variable she could not control. She looked at Logan, then back at me, calculating the damage I might cause. Then the mask slipped back on. She walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "Sack," she said. She leaned in and gave me a hug that involved no contact below the shoulders. It was the heiress hug designed to prevent physical intimacy. I am surprised to see you." "I decided to drive up," I said. "I did not want to miss it." "Right," she said, her voice climbing an octave. "Well, it is an intimate group tonight." Logan Kincaid stepped up beside her. He was wearing a navy sweater over a crisp white shirt. He looked like he had just stepped out of a catalog for luxury sailing gear. He smiled at me, and it was a genuine, easy smile. That was the thing about Logan. He was not malicious. He was just comfortable. He had been rich for so long that he did not have the anxiety my family had. He did not need to perform. "Savannah," he said, offering a hand. "Good to see you. I did not know you were making the trek." "Last-minute decision," I lied. "Glad you are here," he said. The roads were okay. "Manageable," I said. Before we could continue, my mother swooped in. She placed a hand on Logan's arm, a gesture of possession and redirection. "Logan, darling, I need you to look at the wine selection for dinner. Graham is debating between the Panino and the Cab, and we really value your palate." It was a clumsy extraction, but it worked. Logan apologized with a shrug and let himself be led away. My mother did not look at me as she guided him toward the kitchen. She simply removed the audience so she wouldn't have to deal with the act. I was left standing alone in the center of the room. I walked over to the bar cart, which was stocked with bottles that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I did not want alcohol. I needed to be sharp. From across the room, I felt eyes on me. I turned. Standing by the floor to ceiling window, away from the warmth of the fire, was Miles Kincaid. I had met Miles only twice before. He was Logan's older brother and the chief operating officer of Kincaid Micromobility. If Logan was the face, the smile, the handshake, the marketing pitch, Miles was the brain. He was darker, sharper, less classically handsome, but far more arresting. He was wearing a charcoal suit with no tie. He held a glass of dark liquor, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just holding it. He was watching me. Most people in that room looked at me and saw a disruption. They saw a woman in a black blouse who was ruining the seating chart. But Miles looked at me differently. His gaze was clinical. It was the look of an engineer trying to figure out why a machine was making the noise it shouldn't be making. He did not smile. He did not wave. He just stared, his eyes tracking me as I took a sip of water. It was unsettling. Miles was the one person in the Kincaid hierarchy who actually read the financial reports in detail. He was the one who signed off on the chaotic restructuring plans I had analyzed years ago. He was the one who had likely noticed the pattern of capital injections from Hawthorne Meridian LC. Even if he didn't know the face behind the LLC, I held his gaze for 3 seconds, a challenge, before looking away. The room began to fill with a low hum of conversation as the Kincaid parents arrived. I moved to the periphery, standing near a bookshelf filled with leather-bound books that I knew for a fact my parents had never opened. I watched the social dance. My father was laughing too loudly at a story the senior Mr. Kincaid was telling about his golf game. My mother was clutching Mrs. Kincaid's arm, acting as if they had been best friends for decades rather than 2 years. It was a masterclass in sycophancy. A waiter with a tray of hors d'oeuvres passed by. He offered me a tartlet. I declined, and this is I heard Mrs. Kincaid's voice. She was looking in my direction, asking my mother. I braced myself for the introduction. This is our eldest daughter, Savannah. She is a designer in Portland. My mother turned, saw me, and then turned back to Mrs. Kincaid with a tight smile. Oh, that is just Savannah. She is visiting. She did not say daughter. She did not say sister of the bride. She stripped me of my biological rank. I was just Savannah, a noun without a modifier, a person who was visiting, like a neighbor who had dropped by to borrow sugar and lingered too long. The dismissal was absolute. It was designed to signal to the Kincaids that I was not part of the package deal. I was not someone they needed to worry about, impress, or integrate. I was background noise. I took another sip of water. The bubbles felt sharp against my tongue from across the room. Miles Kincaid was still watching. He had moved closer now, leaning against the back of a sofa. He wasn't participating in the group fawning over the wedding plans. He was observing the room, and every time his eyes swept the space, they snagged on me. He knew something was wrong. Not socially wrong, but structurally wrong. He was a man who understood leverage, and he was looking at me like he was trying to figure out where my center of gravity lay. I turned my back to him and looked out the window at the snow falling in the darkness. My reflection stared back, a ghost superimposed over the frozen landscape. Let them ignore me. Let them pretend I was just a visitor in my own history. Let them think I was the one out in the cold. The temperature in the room was 72, perfect and climate-controlled. But as I watched my parents desperately auditioning for the approval of the people whose company I secretly owned, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold, hard clarity of the bottom line. They were treating me like a sunk cost. They were about to find out I was the only asset they had left. The dining room was a theater stage set for a performance I was never meant to attend. A long table made of reclaimed walnut dominated the space, illuminated by a chandelier that looked like a constellation of frozen raindrops. There were 10 high-backed velvet chairs arranged perfectly, 5 on each side. The symmetry was aggressive. It spoke of a plan that had been finalized weeks ago, a seating chart negotiated with the precision of a peace treaty. And then there was me. I stood awkwardly by the sideboard while a flustered catering staff member brought in a folding chair from the garage. They draped it in a white cloth to disguise its humble origins, but it was still lower than the others. They squeezed me in at the far end of the table, on the corner to the left of my father. It was the position of a child who had been allowed to sit with the adults for the first time, or perhaps a secretary taking minutes for a board meeting. I sat down, the tablecloth bunched up against my knees. To my right, the conversation was already flowing like a river I could not swim in. The truffle oil is imported from a small vineyard in Piedmont, my mother was saying, gesturing to the Carpac starter. Graham and I found it on our trip 2 years ago. We simply had to bring a case back. I looked at the plate in front of me. It was beautiful, a piece of art. I picked up my fork. A server moved around the table with a bottle of heavy dark red wine. He filled Graham Kincaid's glass, then my father's, then Loban's. He moved with a fluid grace, pouring with his right hand, a napkin over his left arm. He circled the table, filling Sienna's glass, then my mother's. When he reached me, the bottle was empty. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at the empty bottle, then at my empty glass, and gave me a tight, apologetic nod before walking away to the kitchen. He did not return with a new bottle. The conversation moved on. The toast happened. I raised my water glass while everyone else swirled their vintage Cabernet. It was a microaggression so subtle, it was almost elegant. If I complained, I would look petty. If I asked for wine, I would look like an alcoholic. So I sat with my water, the bubbles going flat, while the table turned into an echo chamber of self-congratulation. "It is all about legacy," my father said, leaning back in his chair. He had that flush in his cheeks that came after his second drink. "You know, when Evelyn and I started our logistics firm back in Ohio, we did not have two nickels to rub together. We built that company on grit, pure grit. There were months where we did not know if we would make payroll, but we never took a dime of outside help. We wanted to show the girls what independence looked like." I kept my face perfectly still, slicing a piece of beef so thin it was translucent. That was a lie. I remembered the year they were talking about. I was 24. They had overextended on a fleet of trucks they did not need. The bank had called in their loan. They were not showing us independence. They were weeping at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, terrified of bankruptcy. I had wired them $15,000, my entire savings at the time, under the guise of a bonus I had supposedly received just to help them cover the mortgage. They had taken the money, bought a new dining set 2 months later, and never mentioned it again. Now, in front of the Kincaids, that history had been sanitized. The fear was gone. The near ruin was gone. My contribution was erased. "Sienna has that same drive," my mother added, beaming at her favorite daughter. "She has always been the one to take initiative. Even as a child, she was the organizer, the leader." Sienna smiled, looking down at her lap with practiced modesty. "Oh, Mom, stop. I just liked planning parties." "No, it is true," Sienna continued, looking up at the table, her eyes sliding over me before darting away. "I think growing up, I had to be the loud one. Savannah was always well. She was in her own world, very quiet. She preferred her sketchbooks to people. We used to joke that she was the hermit of the family." I chewed slowly. The description was not technically wrong, but the context was weaponized. She was painting a picture of me as socially inept, a strange creature who did not understand the language of connection. It validated why I was sitting at the corner of the table. It told the Kincaids, do not worry about her. She chooses to be on the outside. Design requires a certain level of introspection, I said. My voice was calm, but it cut through the ambient chatter. The table went quiet for a beat. It was the first time I had spoken since we sat down. Miles Kincaid, sitting diagonally across from me, turned his head. He had barely touched his food. He looked bored by his parents' conversation, but when I spoke, his interest seemed to sharpen. "That is right," Miles said. His voice was deep, lacking the polished salesman cadence of his brother Logan. "You are in branding, correct? What are you working on right now?" It was a direct question, a lifeline, acknowledgement that I had a brain and a career. I opened my mouth to answer. I wanted to tell him about the rebranding project I was leading for a major sustainable agriculture firm in the Willow Valley. I wanted to talk about visual hierarchy and market positioning. "Oh, Savannah does freelance work," my mother interrupted. Her voice was loud, sharp, cutting across the table like a knife. "Small projects, posters, local flyers, that sort of thing. But speaking of work, Miles, you must be so proud of what Sienna is doing with the Kincaid Foundation. She was telling me about the gala you are planning for the spring." I closed my mouth. The door had been slammed in my face. My career, a decade of hard work at a top agency, had been reduced to local flyers. It was not just an insult. It was a tactical maneuver. My mother was terrified that if I started talking about business, I might sound intelligent. I might sound competent. And a competent Savannah was a threat to the narrative that I was the charity case of the family. Miles did not look at Sienna. He kept his eyes on me for another long moment, his expression unreadable, before slowly turning to my mother. "The gala is a significant undertaking," Miles said, his tone flat. The conversation shifted to the charity event. Millions of dollars raised for vague causes, tax write-offs disguised as altruism. I tuned it out, focusing on the movement of the silverware, the way the light hit the crystal glasses. Then my father cleared his throat. He was ready for his big moment. This was the part of the dinner where he proved he was not just a father-in-law, but a peer. Actually, speaking of undertakings, my father said, leaning toward the senior Mr. Kincaid, I was reading up on the distribution expansion Kincaid Micromobility is launching in the European sector, the Germany deal. It is fascinating stuff. I was looking at the projected volume. The table went silent. Business was being discussed. This was the holy grail. It is a game-changer, Logan said, puffing out his chest. We are projecting a 40% increase in total unit volume by the third quarter of next year. The German market is hungry for our cargo models. 40%, my father repeated, nodding sagely. That is incredible. That puts you at what? Roughly 50,000 units a quarter. Closer to 60, Logan said, smiling. We have secured the supply chain to support it. The new factory in Vietnam is already online. I stopped chewing. The fork hovered halfway to my mouth. 60,000 units. That number was wrong. I knew the production capacity of the Vietnam facility. I had reviewed the construction reports and the equipment purchase orders through my shell company 3 months ago. The factory was online. Yes, but it was operating at 30% capacity due to a delay in the lithium-ion battery controllers. The maximum output they could possibly achieve by the third quarter, assuming everything went perfectly, was 35,000 units. If they were projecting 60,000, they were lying. But who were they lying to? I looked at Logan. He looked confident. He believed the number. I looked at the senior Kincaids. They looked proud. They believed the number. I looked at my father. He was just repeating what he had been told, happy to be in the inner circle. Then I looked at Miles. He was not looking at his brother. He was not looking at his parents. He was looking at me. He had seen me pause. He had seen the fork stop in midair. He had seen the tiny, almost imperceptible frown that had creased my forehead when Logan said 60,000. In that split second, a silent communication passed between us across the centerpiece of winter roses and pine. He knew that I knew. I lowered my fork to the plate. The metal made a soft clink against the china. Why would they inflate the numbers by nearly double a discrepancy that large was not in rounding error? It was fraud. It was a pump and dump scheme or a desperate attempt to secure a line of credit before the quarter closed. If they were claiming 60,000 units to their lenders and they could only deliver 35, the stock was going to crash when the audit happened. My stomach turned. My parents were mortgaging their dignity to buy into a family that was potentially sitting on a financial time bomb. They were treating this dinner like a coronation, unaware that the kingdom might be made of papier-mâché. It is a bold strategy, I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The table froze again. Excuse me, Logan asked, his smile faltering slightly. Scaling to 60,000 units in 6 months, I said, keeping my voice light, conversational. That is a very aggressive ramp-up curve, especially considering the global shortage of semiconductor controllers for the battery management systems. Most of the industry is facing a 12-week lead time. My father's face went purple. Savannah, he hissed. Do not bore everyone with things you do not understand. This is high-level manufacturing, not drawing pictures. No, no, Logan said, waving a hand dismissively. It is a valid concern for a layperson. But we have proprietary channels. We are covered. Of course, I said, I am sure you are. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. My mother looked like she wanted to reach across the table and strangle me with her pearl necklace. Sienna looked mortified, her eyes pleading with me to stop. But Miles did not look annoyed. He looked like a predator who had just caught the scent of blood. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming silently on the tablecloth. He realized that the graphic designer knew about semiconductor lead times. He realized that the visitor knew the industry bottlenecks. He began to watch me with a new intensity. It wasn't the look of a man attracted to a woman. It was the look of a general assessing a spy. He was wondering how much I knew. He was wondering if the anonymous shareholder who had been buying up their stock, the one he had been trying to identify for months, was sitting right there, wearing a black blouse and drinking water at the end of the table. The dinner continued. The courses came and went. The laughter resumed loud and hollow. My parents continued to sell themselves, offering up their dignity in exchange for proximity to the Kincaid name. But the flavor of the evening had changed for me. I was no longer just the unwanted guest. I was the witness. I looked around the table. They were all eating, drinking, celebrating a future that was built on bad math. I felt a strange detachment. I was not just excluded from their conversation. I was excluded from their delusion. They were all living in a fantasy where 60,000 bikes would magically appear, where debts did not exist, where image was the only currency that mattered. I was the only one living in the real world. I placed my napkin on the table. The white cloth was stained with a single drop of red source, bright as a warning light. I knew then that the night was going to end in violence. Not physical violence, but the violence of truth. The numbers were going to come out. The ledger was going to be balanced, and the people who had treated me like a ghost were about to realize that ghosts are the only ones who can walk through walls and see what is hidden on the other side. The remnants of the dessert course lay on the table like a battlefield of sugar and ceramic. I had eaten exactly 3 spoonfuls of the creme brulee, the burnt sugar crunching loudly in the silence that seemed to have wrapped itself around me. The Kincaid parents were discussing their winter property in Aspen with a fervor that suggested skiing was a moral virtue rather than a hobby. Miles was still watching me from across the table, his gaze heavy and unblinking while Logan was busy topping off everyone's wine glasses for the 4th time. Then the signal happened. It was subtle, a synchronized movement that only a lifetime of studying Graham and Evelyn Rivera would allow one to catch. My father placed his napkin on the table and cleared his throat. My mother smoothed the fabric of her skirt and stood up. Sienna, who had been staring intently at the flame of a candle, pushed her chair back. "Savannah," my father said. His voice was too loud, too jovial. "Why do you not join us in the hallway for a moment? Your mother and I have a small Christmas surprise for you. We can leave the Kincaids to their coffee." He gestured toward the archway that led to the west wing of the house, a corridor that offered the illusion of privacy while remaining visible to the main room. It was a glass-walled corridor lined with expensive art designed to show off rather than to hide. I stood up. I could feel Miles's eyes drilling into my back. "Of course," I said. I followed them. My father walked point. My mother flanked me, and Sienna trailed behind like a reluctant guard. We stopped near a console table topped with a bronze sculpture of a horse. The music from the living room was faint here, a distant jazz bass line that thumped like a slow heartbeat. My father did not waste time. He reached into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a blue folder. It was thick, heavy linen paper stock. The logo embossed on the front read, "Pinehurst Legal Group. We want you to know that we love you, Savannah." My mother started. Her hands were clasped in front of her chest. "We know that things have been difficult. We know you feel out of place. We want to help you." My father cut in. He tapped the folder against his open palm. "We have been thinking about your future. You are struggling. We know that the design market is tough, and honestly, having you at these events, it creates a tension that is not good for anyone. Not for us, not for Sienna, and certainly not for you." He held the folder out to me. "What is this?" I asked. I did not take it yet. "It is a proposal," my father said. "A structured assistance plan. We are prepared to offer you a monthly stipend, $3,000 a month, tax-free, wired directly to your account. It is enough to cover your rent in Portland. Maybe get you a better car. It is freedom, Savannah." "And in exchange?" I asked. "In exchange," my mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you agree to maintain a respectful distance during the integration period, the wedding, the merger events next year. We just think it would be best if you lived your life, and we lived ours independent of each other." I looked at Sienna. She was biting her lip, looking at the floor. She knew about this. She had signed off on this. I took the folder. "We need you to sign it tonight," my father said. His casual tone evaporated, replaced by a sudden jagged urgency. "The lawyers want to close the books on the trust structure before the end of the fiscal year. Midnight tonight is the deadline for this quarter." "Tonight?" I raised an eyebrow. "On Christmas Eve. Pinehurst Legal Group is working late." "It is just a formality," he insisted, pulling a silver fountain pen from his pocket. "Just sign the acknowledgement page. We can sort out the routing numbers later." I opened the folder. The document inside was titled Family Asset and Liability Restructuring Agreement. I began to read. I did not skim. I read with the eyes of a woman who had spent the last decade dissecting merger, agreements, and hostile takeover bids. "Savannah, honey, you do not need to read the whole thing now," my mother said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is standard language, just boilerplate." "I always read the boilerplate, Mom," I said without looking up. The first 2 pages were exactly what they said, a non-disclosure agreement and a contract for the monthly payments. It was insulting. They were essentially offering to pay me off to stop embarrassing them. $3,000 a month was the price of my absence. But then I turned to page 4. The formatting changed slightly. The font was smaller. Paragraph 4, subsection B. The beneficiary, Savannah R. Rivera, agrees to assume the position of Guinea for the outstanding liabilities of Rivera Kincaid Holdings, specifically the bridge loan facility dated October 14th, secured against the diversified assets listed in Schedule A. I stopped. I read it again. Rivera Kincaid Holdings. That was a shell company my father had likely set up to hold his investment in the wedding were the merger and the bridge loan. I flipped to Schedule at the back of the packet. The loan amount was not listed, but the collateral was future earnings and intellectual property rights. My mind raced, connecting the dots with cold, terrifying precision. My father had bought into the Kincaid hype. He had likely borrowed a massive sum of money to buy stock or to pay for this lifestyle, to impress them using a high-interest bridge loan. Now the bank was calling it in, or the terms were about to reset to something predatory. They were not giving me $3,000 a month. They were paying me a pittance to sign a document that would transfer the legal liability of that debt on to me. If I signed this, I became the guarantor. When the loan defaulted, which it absolutely would, given the false production numbers I had heard at dinner, the creditors would not come after my father. They would not come after the Kincaids. They would come after me. They thought I was broke. They thought I had nothing to lose. They probably figured I would declare bankruptcy, ruin my credit for 7 years, and the debt would vanish. They were using me as a human shield to protect their credit rating and their standing with the Kincaids. They were literally selling me into financial ruin to save their own skins. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained perfectly steady. I looked up. My father was watching me, sweat beating on his upper lip despite the cool air of the house. He looked terrified, not for me, but for himself. He needed that signature. He needed a sign. "It is a generous offer. Savannah," he said, "please just sign it so we can go back to the party." I looked past him through the glass wall of the hallway. Miles Kincaid was standing near the entrance to the living room. He was not drinking. He was leaning against the door frame, his arms crossed. He was looking directly at us. He could not hear the words, but he saw the folder. He saw the pen, and he was smiling. It was a small, tight smile, a smile of recognition. He knew what was in that folder. Suddenly, the picture became even clearer. Miles was the one who had engineered this. He must have pressured my father about the buying money. He must have suggested that my father secure his position. Miles knew the company was shaky. He wanted to insulate himself. He had likely guided my father to this solution. Get the sister to sign. She is a nobody. If the ship goes down, let her drown in the debt. Miles thought he was playing chess against a pigeon. He thought he was watching the final move of a game he had already won. I looked back at my family. "Sienna," I said softly. She looked up, her eyes wet. "Please, Savannah, just do it. Dad says it is the only way we can make the wedding happen smoothly. It is for my future, Blaze." She believed it. She actually believed that destroying me was a necessary tax for her happiness. She did not understand the mechanics of the debt, but she understood the sacrifice. She was willing to throw me into the volcano to ensure the harvest was good. A cold, hard stone formed in my stomach. The last thread of loyalty I held for them, the tiny fraying rope that had kept me tethered to the hope that they were just misguided, snapped. They were not misguided. They were predatory. I closed the blue folder. The sound was soft, like a book being shut in a library. I did not scream. I did not throw the papers in my father's face. That would have been messy. That would have been emotional. And I was done being emotional. I was a majority shareholder now. I was a business entity. I handed the folder back to my father. I need to have my own counsel review the indemnification clauses, I said. My voice was light, almost bored. Standard procedure. Counsel. My father laughed. A nervous barking sound. Savannah, you do not have a lawyer. You do not need one. This is family. I always have a lawyer for contracts regarding liability transfer, I said. I forced a small, thin smile onto my face. It felt tight. I will let you know. My father's face went pale. Savannah, the deadline is tonight if you do not sign this. Then I guess we missed the deadline, I said. I turned away from them. I did not wait for their permission to leave the hallway. I walked back toward the living room, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I passed Miles Kincaid. He straightened up as I approached. The smile was still there, arrogant and assured. He thought I was walking away in defeat. He thought I was just delaying the inevitable. "Everything okay?" he asked as I passed him. His voice was low, intimate. "You look a little pale." I stopped. I turned to face him. We were inches apart. I could smell his expensive cologne, something musky and sharp. "I am fine, Miles," I said, "just reviewing some investment opportunities." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The word investment hit him wrong. "Is that so?" he said. "Yes," I said. "You have to be careful where you put your signature these days. You never know who is holding the debt." I held his gaze until he blinked. Then I walked past him back into the warmth of the party. I checked my watch. It was 11:45 at night. 15 minutes to midnight. 15 minutes until Christmas. I reached into my clutch and touched the cool metal of my phone. I had a message drafted to Elliot Crane, my attorney. I did not need to send it yet. I had something better planned. My parents were still in the hallway, huddled together, likely panicking. Sienna was probably wiping her eyes, fixing her makeup so she could come back out and play the happy bride. They thought the crisis was that I hadn't signed the paper. They were wrong. The crisis was sitting in the cloud server of the Securities and Exchange Commission, waiting for the clock to strike 12. I walked over to the fireplace and warmed my hands. I felt calm. It was the calm of a demolition expert who has already set the charges and is just walking toward the bunker to press the button. They wanted me to be a shield. I was not a shield. I was the bomb. I paused at the edge of the living room, my hand resting on the cool plaster of the wall. My father was still hovering near the hallway entrance, his face a mask of anxious perspiration. He needed a sign. He needed to know that his plan to offload his financial ruin onto his eldest daughter was working. I turned back to him. I did not smile, but I softened the tension in my shoulders just enough to simulate resignation. "Let me think about it," I said, my voice pitched low enough that only he and my mother could hear. "I need 10 minutes. Just let me clear my head." The relief that washed over Graham Rivera's face was pathetic. He nodded vigorously, looking like a man who had just been granted a stay of execution. "Of course, Savannah, take your time. We will be right here." I walked past him, heading not toward the front door, but toward the powder room tucked under the main staircase. As I closed the heavy oak door and turned the lock, the sounds of the party, the clinking of crystal, the jazz piano, the performative laughter were severed instantly. The bathroom was a sanctuary of black marble and gold fixtures. It was designed to impress guests, but right now it was my war room. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run in a steady, loud stream to mask my voice. Then I pulled my phone from my clutch. My hands were not shaking. A strange glacial calm had settled over me. I dialed Elliot Crane. Elliot was not a family lawyer. He was a corporate shark who specialized in mergers, acquisitions, and hostile takeovers. He was the kind of attorney you hired when you wanted to burn a village to save a castle. It was Christmas Eve, but I knew he would answer. I paid him a retainer of $5,000 a month specifically for his availability. "Rivera." His voice came through the speaker after one ring. He sounded awake, alert. "Merry Christmas. Please tell me you are calling with a crisis because I am currently bored to tears at my in-laws' house." "I am sending you a secure message," I said, bypassing the pleasantries. "I need you to run a search on a specific entity immediately. Rivera Kincaid Holdings, and cross-reference it with a bridge loan facility originating around October 14th of this year. On it, Elliot said, I heard the distinct clatter of a keyboard in the background. Give me 60 seconds. What am I looking for? I think it is a liability dump, I said, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My lipstick was still perfect. My parents just tried to pressure me into signing a restructuring agreement. They want to pay me a stipend in exchange for becoming the guarantor on a debt secured by future earnings. They called it a formality. That is not a formality, Savannah, Elliot said, his voice dropping an octave. That is a trap door. I waited. The water continued to rush into the sink. Here we go, Elliot said. Rivera Kincaid Holdings registered in Nevada. Sole managing member is Graham Rivera. But look at this. The capitalization structure is a mess. They took out a secured loan for $2 million, $400,000 from a private equity lender in Chicago. High interest, predatory terms. $2.4 million, I repeated. The number hung in the air like smoke. And here is the kicker, Elliot continued. The collateral listed is Series B preferred stock in Kincaid Micromobility. Savannah, your father borrowed $2 million against stock that he does not effectively control yet, or stock that is currently underwater. The pieces clicked into place with the violence of a guillotine blade dropping. He bought the buy-in, I whispered. He borrowed the money to buy the shares to get into the family trust, thinking the stock would skyrocket after the merger. Correct, Elliot said. But the stock hasn't skyrocketed. It has plateaued, and that loan has a balloon payment due. Let me see, January 15th. If he cannot refinance or pay it, he defaults. And if you sign that paper, then I become the one who owes $2.4 million. I finish the sentence. Exactly. They are trying to transfer the bankruptcy to you. They keep the house. They keep the status. You get the debt. It is a classic risk transfer. They are terrified. Severe. I looked at the phone. It wasn't just my parents. Miles Kincaid was involved. He knew about this. He had likely encouraged my father to take the loan, knowing the terms were impossible, and now he was orchestrating the cleanup. Elliot, I said, my voice hardening, check the internal alerts for Kincaid Micromobility, the supply chain notifications. Switching screens, Elliot said, okay, I am looking at the dashboard. We have flagged 3 transactions in the last 48 hours. Large outgoing payments to a vendor called Summit Logistics. Is that a known partner? No, I said. Summit Logistics is a shell. I remember seeing that name on a rejected vendor list 3 years ago. Miles is moving cash. He is draining the liquidity. Elliot said if he is moving cash to a shell company on Christmas Eve, he knows the ship is taking on water. He is packing his lifeboats. It all made sense. The lie about the 60,000 units at dinner. They were inflating the numbers to keep the stock price up just long enough to loot the company treasury before the audit revealed the truth. My father was a pawn in Miles's game, and I was intended to be the sacrifice. They wanted me gone because I am the variable. I said they thought I was just an embarrassing relative. They didn't know I could read a balance sheet. Savannah, Elliot said you have 52%. You can stop this. You can freeze the accounts right now. No, I said, not yet. I want them to say it. I want to see them raise their glasses to this fraud. What do you need from me? I need the disclosure package. I said, prepare the certificate of controlling interest. I want the capitalization table, the voting rights breakdown, and the total valuation of Hawthorne Meridian's stake. Make it visual, simple, big fonts, something a drunk person can understand. I can have it ready in 5 minutes, Elliot said. How do you want to deliver it? The living room has a 70-inch television that is currently displaying a fireplace loop. I said it is a smart TV. I can cast to it. I will set up a secure video link. Elliot said, I will be on camera. I will read the riot act. You just give the signal. Be ready at midnight. I said when the clock strikes, we go live. Understood. Good hunting, Savannah. I hung up. I turned off the faucet. The sudden silence in the bathroom was heavy. I dried my hands on a linen towel that was embroidered with my parents' initials, a monogram that represented a dynasty built on debt and deceit. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. I did not look like a victim. I did not look like the hermit sister. I looked like the CEO of a company that was about to undergo a hostile restructuring. I unlocked the door and stepped out. The party had moved into a hired gear. The lights had been dimmed, and the music was slightly louder. Laughter rippled through the room. My mother was sitting on the arm of a sofa, holding court with Mrs. Kincaid. Sienna was leaning her head on Logan's shoulder, looking peaceful, believing her future was secured. My father was standing by the bar, refilling his drink. When he saw me emerge, his eyes snapped to my hands. He was looking for the blue folder. I didn't have it. I walked over to the nearest empty armchair, a velvet wing-back chair positioned perfectly in the center of the room's visual field, and sat down. I crossed my legs. I smoothed my skirt. My father hurried over, leaning down so his face was close to my ear. "Savannah, the folder. Did you sign it?" "I left it in the bathroom." I lied smoothly. "I need to wash my hands of it, but do not worry, Dad. I have made a decision." He exhaled, the smell of whiskey strong on his breath. Good girl. We can grab it later. Just try to blend in until midnight." "Okay, I will be invisible," I said. He patted my shoulder, a heavy, patronizing tap, and walked away, confident that he had won. He went straight to Miles Kincaid. I watched them exchange a nod. Miles smirked. It was a victory lap before the race was over. I sat there, a statue in black silk, watching the minutes tick away on the mantel clock. 1,150. The catering staff began to circulate with trays of champagne. This was the special bottle, a vintage Dom Perignon that cost $300 a bottle. They poured a glass for everyone. When the waiter came to me, he hesitated again. "Pour it," I said. My voice was soft but absolute. He poured the wine. The bubbles rose in a frantic golden rush. 11:55. The room began to quiet down. The anticipation of the midnight toast was building. This was the tradition. At midnight, they would toast the union of the Revere and Kincaid families. They would toast the merger. They would toast the future. I pulled my phone out and placed it on my lap, face up. The screen displayed a single button. Connect to device. Living room TV. 11:50. Graham Rivera stepped into the center of the room. He held his glass high. The firelight caught the crystal, making it sparkle. He looked like a king. He looked like a man who had successfully sold his daughter to save his castle. "Family," my father began, his voice booming with false emotion. "Friends, as we approach the stroke of midnight, I want to take a moment to reflect on gratitude. We are so blessed to be here in this beautiful home, celebrating the union of two great legacies." Sienna beamed. Logan smiled. Miles swirled his drink, looking bored but satisfied. "To the Cades," my father continued, "and to the Riverers, may the coming year bring us prosperity, growth, and unity." "To unity," the room echoed. I wrapped my fingers around the stem of my champagne glass, but I did not raise it. The second hand on the clock swept past the 12. 11:59. My father opened his mouth to say, "Merry Christmas." I pressed the button on my phone. The 70-in television screen behind him, which had been displaying a cozy loop of crackling logs, went black. The sudden loss of light drew everyone's eyes. "What happened to the fire?" Mrs. Kincaid asked, confused. Then the screen flickered to life. It wasn't the fire. It was a stark white background with the logo of Crane Associates Corporate Law. The room went deadly silent, and then Elliot Crane's face appeared, high definition and looming large over the room. He was sitting in his home office wearing a tuxedo jacket over a t-shirt, looking straight into the camera. My father lowered his glass slowly. "What is this?" I remained seated. I did not stand up. I did not shout. I simply took a sip of my champagne. It was crisp, cold, and tasted like victory. "Good evening." Elliot's voice boomed from the surround sound speakers, crisp and authoritative. I apologized for the interruption. The trap was sprung. The quiet luxury was about to get very loud. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floorboards, marking the death of one day and the birth of another. Midnight. "Merry Christmas." My mother trilled, her voice pitching up into that frantic gaiety she reserved for social climbing. "To the Kincaids," my father bellowed, raising his glass of vintage champagne so high the liquid sloshed over the rim and ran down his fingers. To the future. The room was a chorus of agreement. 10 crystal flutes were poised to clash in the air. The energy was manic, a collective delusion that if they just toasted hard enough, the lies would become truth. I stood up. I did not slide my chair back quietly. I pushed it. The wooden legs screeched against the hardwood floor, a harsh tearing sound that cut through the layer of jazz music, and laughter like a razor blade. The toast faltered. 10 pairs of eyes swung toward me. My father looked annoyed. His mouth opened to chide me for ruining the rhythm. My mother looked terrified, her eyes darting to the Kincaidades to see if they had noticed the breach in etiquette. "Savannah," my father hissed through his teeth. "Sit down. We are toasting." "Before we toast," I said. My voice was not loud. I did not shout. I spoke with the flat and indifferent cadence of someone reading a grocery list. "I need 5 minutes." "This is not the time," Logan Kincaid said, his smile tight. "Savannah, we can catch up after." I said, "I need 5 minutes." I interrupted him. I did not look at Logan. I looked at the 70-inch television screen mounted above the fireplace. I tapped the screen of my phone. The image of the crackling U-log vanished. The room plunged into a momentary confused gloom as the light source disappeared. Then the screen flashed white. It was blindingly bright. In the dim room, a face appeared. Elliot Crane sat in his home office framed by bookshelves. He was not smiling. He looked into the camera lens with the boredom of a man who had done this 1,000 times and the intensity of a man who enjoyed it every single time. "Good evening," Elliot said. His voice was amplified by the surround sound system booming from the corners of the room. "My name is Elliot Crane. I am acting as general counsel for Hawthorne Meridian Limited Liability Company." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. You could hear the snow hitting the window panes. "Hawthorne Meridian." Miles Kincaid repeated the name. It was a whisper, but it carried. He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He knew that name. He had been fighting that name for 3 years. Pursuant to the shareholder bylaws of Kincaid Micromobility, Elliot continued, ignoring the interruption, and following the close of the automated trading execution at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. "I am here to formally notify the board of a change in control." My father's hand began to tremble. The champagne in his glass rippled. He looked at the screen, then at Miles, then at me. He did not understand. He thought this was a prank. He thought this was some sort of televised news report. As of 60 seconds ago, Elliot said, "Hawthorne Meridian LLC has exercised its convertible warrants and executed a block purchase of all outstanding Class B voting shares." A graphic appeared on the screen next to Elliot's head. It was a pie chart. It was simple. It was brutal. One massive slice of the pie was colored a deep aggressive crimson. The current ownership stake of Hawthorne Meridian LLC in Kincaid Micromobility is now 52.1%, Elliot stated. The number hung in the air. 52.1% majority control ownership. "This is impossible," Logan said. He laughed. A short, nervous bark. "That is not possible. We have safeguards." "We have you had debt," Elliot corrected him calmly, "and you had a liquidity crisis that you tried to solve by selling equity derivatives to anonymous buyers. Those buyers were us." The screen changed again. It was a document, a standard incorporation filing for the state of Delaware. "Who is Hawthorne Meridian?" "Mrs. Kincaid asked. Her voice was shrill. "Who are these people? Graham, do you know about this?" My father was frozen. He was staring at the screen. He was staring at the line Elliot had just highlighted in yellow. Managing member and sole beneficiary, Savannah Rivera. The name was 10 ft wide. It loomed over the room like a billboard. Savannah Rivera. The sound of shattering glass broke the spell. My father's fingers had gone numb. The crystal flute slipped from his grasp and hit the hardwood floor. It did not just break. It exploded. Shards of glass flew across the Persian rug. The expensive vintage champagne pulled around his polished dress shoes like a puddle of golden blood. He did not look down. He did not move to clean it up. He stared at me. His mouth hung open, slack and trembling. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking gray and old. "Savannah," my mother whispered. She brought a hand to her chest, clutching her pearls as if they were the only thing holding her writh caged together. "What have you done?" Sienna backed away from me. She looked at me with wide, fearful eyes, as if I had just peeled off a mask to reveal a monster underneath. She bumped into the sofa and nearly lost her balance. "You," she stammered. "You own the company." I did not answer them. I looked at Miles. He was the only one who wasn't panicking. He was the only one who wasn't asking stupid questions. He was standing perfectly still, his glass of whiskey held steady in his hand. He was looking at the screen, and then he slowly turned his head to look at me. His expression was complex. There was anger. Yes, there was shock, but underneath it, there was a dark, grudging recognition. He realized the game he had been playing. He realized he had been sitting across the board from a grandmaster while he thought he was playing solitaire. "Hawthorne," Miles said softly. He tested the word on his tongue. "Hawthorne, that was the street where your grandmother lived in Ohio." "Yes," I said. "And Meridian," he continued. "That is the name of the design agency you interned at in college." "Correct." I said. "So you are her?" Miles said it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "You are the one who blocked the merger last year. You are the one who forced the audit in 2020. You are the one who has been bleeding us dry. I am the one who kept you alive," I said. My voice was cold, sharp enough to cut glass. "I am the one who injected capital when the banks laughed at you. I am the one who covered your payroll 3 times in the last 5 years. I am not bleeding you, Miles. I am the only reason you have a pulse." "You," Logan sputtered. He looked from me to the screen and back again. He looked like a child who had been told Santa Claus was actually a tax auditor. "But you are a designer. You drive a Subaru. You live in an apartment." "I like my apartment," I said. "And I like my Subaru. It is paid for. Unlike this house, unlike your car, unlike your entire company." My father finally found his voice. It was a strangled, wet sound. "Savannah, this is a misunderstanding. You cannot possibly 52%. That is millions of dollars. Where did you get that kind of money?" "I'd earned it," I said. "And I invested it while you were busy trying to buy your way into this room." "I was buying the room itself." On the screen, Elliot Crane cleared his throat. "MS. Rivera, the transfer is codified. The board notification has been sent via secure courier to all directors. As of this moment, you have the authority to call an emergency session." "Thank you, Elliot," I said. "You can disconnect." "Understood. Merry Christmas." The screen went black. The darkness felt heavier now. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the wreckage of their egos. My mother took a step toward me. Her hands were shaking. She put on a smile, a terrified, grotesque imitation of her hostess' face. "Savannah, darling, listen. This is a lot to take in, but we are family. We can discuss this. We can sit down and—" "No," I said. "We cannot." But the wedding Sienna cried out. Her voice cracked. "Savannah, please. My wedding, Logan and I, this changes everything. It changes nothing about your love for him." "Does it?" I asked. "Unless your marriage was contingent on the stock price." Sienna flinched as if I had slapped her. "How could you?" My father roared suddenly. The shock was turning into rage. He stepped over the broken glass, ignoring the crunch under his shoes. "We invited you here. We welcomed you, and you ambush us on Christmas. You ungrateful, ungrateful." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You invited me here to sign a liability waiver. Dad, you invited me here to take the fall for $2 million debt you cannot pay. You invited me here to be your garbage disposal." My father stopped. His face went white again. He knew I knew. "I did not sign your folder," I said, "and I am not going to pay your debt. That loan is personal to you. But the company is mine, and I am going to run it the way it should have been run 10 years ago, without the fraud, without the inflated numbers, and without the parasites." I looked at Miles. "Expect the audit team on Tuesday, 8:00 in the morning. Have the books ready. The real books." Miles did not blink. He raised his glass to me in a mock salute. "Well played, Savannah." I turned away from them. I walked to the coat rack near the door. My movements were precise. I put on my charcoal wool coat. I buttoned it. I wrapped my staff around my neck. "Savannah, wait." My mother pleaded. She was crying now, real tears of panic. Where are you going? You cannot just leave. We have guests. We are a family. I opened the heavy walnut door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the clean, biting scent of snow and pine. It smelled like freedom. I turned back one last time. They were a tableau of ruin. My father standing in a puddle of champagne, defeated. My mother weeping for her lost status. Sienna looking at a future that had just evaporated. And the Kincaids, the Bolden family, realized they were now employees of the woman they had ignored for 2 hours. I am not your family's background decoration, I said. I stepped out onto the porch. I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked down the long heated driveway. The snow was falling softly, large white flakes drifting down from the black sky. The air was frigid, biting at my cheeks, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a fire burning in my chest, bright and hot. I reached my car. I looked back at the house. It glowed on the hill, a beacon of warmth and light, but I knew it was cold inside. I got into my Subaru. I started the engine. I did not look back as I drove away, leaving the tire tracks in the fresh snow as the only signature I needed to leave behind. The silence of the snowy road was a lie. Inside the cabin of my car, the air was vibrating. It was not the engine and it was not the heater. It was my phone. I had thrown it onto the passenger seat after leaving the driveway, and for the last 20 minutes it had been lighting up the dark interior like a strobe light in a nightclub. Buzz, flash, buzz, flash. I did not look at it. I kept my eyes on the winding road that led back down the mountain toward the center of Bend. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the midnight revelation was beginning to metabolize into a cold, hard exhaustion. My hands on the steering wheel were steady, but my mind felt like a browser with too many tabs open. I pulled into the parking lot of the Oxford Hotel. I had booked a suite there 2 days ago, anticipating that I would not be welcome or would not want to stay at my parents' house. It was another expense my parents would have called wasteful, but right now it felt like the best investment of the year. I gathered my purse and the phone. I finally looked at the screen. 42 missed calls, 63 text messages, 12 emails. The breakdown was predictable. My mother was the volume shooter. She had called 20 times. My father was the texter, firing off short, panicked bursts. Sienna was the emailer, likely drafting long, tear-stained paragraphs on her iPhone notes app before hitting send. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, the phone still buzzing in my hand. I did not answer. I walked into my room, locked the door, and threw the device onto the bed. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap and sat down in the armchair by the window, watching the snow fall over the sleeping town. Only then did I pick up the phone to survey the damage. The texts from my father Graham were a study in the stages of grief accelerated into minutes. Savannah, pick up. We need to explain. It is not what it looks like. The lawyer is wrong. You are making a mistake. You are humiliating us. Call me now. The Kincaids are furious. Please, Sav, we can fix this. Just sign the waiver and we can undo the transfer. I laughed, a dry sound in the empty room. Undo the transfer. He still did not understand. He thought this was a transaction he could void with a refund receipt. He did not grasp that Hawthorne Meridian was not a glitch. It was the new reality. My mother's messages were purely emotional manipulation. I cannot believe you did this to your sister. After everything we have done for you, you have ruined Christmas. I hope you are happy. Mrs. Kincaid is having palpitations. If anything happens to her, it is on you. I scrolled past them. They were noise. They were the desperate threshing of people who realized their social currency had just been devalued to zero. Then I saw a message from a number I did not have saved, but I recognized the area code. It was time-stamped 12:15 in the morning. We should talk privately tonight. Miles, of course, while my parents were hyperventilating and Sienna was crying, Miles Kincaid was already looking for the back door. He did not want to scream at me. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted to see if I had a price. He was a shark recognizing another shark in the water. I did not reply. Let him sweat. Let him wonder if I was going to liquidate the assets or sell the company to a competitor. Uncertainty was a more powerful weapon than any threat I could type. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID said Logan Kincaid. I hesitated. Logan was the innocent bystander in this car crash. He was the golden retriever of the family, loyal, pleasant, and completely unaware of the violence required to keep his bowl full. I swiped right and put the phone to my ear. Severe. His voice was breathless, panic fraying the edges of his usual smooth baritone. Thank God. I thought you blocked us all. I am screening calls. Logan, I said calmly. It has been a long night. Savannah, you have to tell me this isn't real, he said. The TV thing, the 52%. My dad is losing it. He is saying you stole the company. He is saying it is a hostile takeover. It was a purchase, Logan. I said open market transactions, convertible debt. It is all legal. You can have your lawyers check the filings on Tuesday. But why? He asked. Why didn't you tell me I am marrying your sister? We are family. Are we? I asked. I did not feel like family when I was sitting at the children's table tonight. I did not feel like family when I was handed a folder that would have bankrupted me. There was a silence on the line. Then Logan spoke, his voice dropping to a whisper. I saw the folder, he admitted. After you left, Miles left it on the table. I looked at it. And it looks like a debt transfer, Logan said, sounding sick. $2.4 million, Savannah. Is it true? Is that what your dad owes? That is what your brother and my father cooked up, I said. Your brother lent my father the money to buy into the family trust, knowing my father couldn't pay it back. The plan was to make me the guarantor. When the loan defaulted, I would take the fall and Miles would likely seize my parents' assets anyway. Miles did that? Logan asked. But he runs the finance division. He told me the company was debt-free. Logan, I said, the company is leveraged to the hilt. Why do you think I bought it? Someone had to stop the bleeding before there was nothing left to inherit. I don't believe it, Logan said. Miles said we were just moving assets to protect them from market volatility. Is that what he calls it? I asked. Moving assets. A notification popped up on my laptop screen, which was open on the desk. It was a red alert from the secure server I had set up with Elliot. System alert. Unauthorized access attempt. User level admin. Location Bend, Oregon. IP address 192.16.8.1.555. I put Logan on speaker and typed quickly. Logan, I said, is Miles at the house right now? Yeah, Logan said. He is in the study. He locked the door. He said he is handling damage control. He is not handling damage control, I said, watching the code scroll across my screen. He is trying to access the master shareholder database. And yes, there it is. He is initiating a transfer of intellectual property rights to a holding company in the Caymans. But he is trying to steal the patents. Logan, I said he knows I have control of the stock, so he is trying to gut the company of its value before I can lock him out. He is stealing the battery technology. He wouldn't, Logan stammered. He is doing it right now. I said if he succeeds, Kincaid Micromobility becomes a shell. The stock becomes worthless. Your inheritance becomes zero. And my parents will. My parents will still owe that $2 million, but now they will have no way to pay it. What do I do? Logan asked. The panic was gone, replaced by the hollow realization of betrayal. Nothing, I said. I anticipated this. The system is a honeypot. He thinks he is transferring files, but he is just copying encrypted gibberish. I am logging his keystrokes. Every click is evidence. Savannah, Logan said, his voice cracking. I am sorry. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said softly. Go be with Sienna. She is going to need you. I hung up. I looked at the laptop screen. Miles was persistent. He was trying password after password, likely sweating through his dress shirt in that mahogany-paneled study. I let him try for another minute, building the log file before I executed the command Elliot and I had prepared. Lockout Protocol Alpha. Revoke all admin privileges. Freeze assets somewhere in the house on the hill. A computer screen just went black. Miles Kincaid was probably screaming right now. I sat back in the chair. My heart was beating a little faster, but not from fear. It was the thrill of the hunt. They weren't just apologizing. They were counterattacking. Miles was trying to rob the bank on his way out the door. It confirmed everything I suspected. There was no morality here. There was only leverage. My phone pinged with an email from Sienna Rivera. Subject: Please read. I opened it. It was long. It was rambling, but the core of it was in the second paragraph. Sad, I know you are angry and you have every right to be, but please understand. I was stuck in the middle. I knew Mom and Dad were desperate. I knew they borrowed money, and yes, I knew there was a secret investor. I heard Miles talking about a mystery shareholder months ago. I suspected it might be you. I saw the way you looked at the financial news when we were kids. You were always the smart one. I stopped reading. She suspected. She knew, but I couldn't say anything. The email continued. If I told them it was you, Dad would have freaked out. He would have ruined the engagement. He would have made it impossible for me to marry Logan. I just wanted one date, Sav. One perfect day where I could be the princess and everyone would be happy. I thought if I just kept quiet, you would sign the papers, Dad would get his loan fixed, and we could all move on. I didn't think they would actually hurt you. I put the phone down on the table. She didn't think they would hurt me. She watched them hand me a folder that contained my financial execution, and she said nothing. She knew I was the investor saving the company. Yet, she let our parents treat me like a parasite because it fit the narrative of her perfect day. She had traded me. It was a simple exchange. My dignity and my financial future for her wedding photos. The pain of it was a sharp physical ache in the center of my chest. Sienna was the one person I had tried to protect. I had bought this company for her. I had hidden my success so she wouldn't feel overshadowed. And she had watched me walk into the slaughterhouse and held the door open. My phone buzzed again. My mother, Savannah, you need to think about what this looks like to the neighbors. The rumors are already starting. We could lose the club membership. We could lose the house. Please be reasonable. That was it. That was the bottom line. It wasn't we love you. It wasn't we're sorry. It was we could lose the club membership. They were terrified of the social fall. They were terrified that the quiet luxury facade was about to be stripped away to reveal the loud, desperate poverty of their character. I picked up the phone and typed a reply to Sienna. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. You say you didn't think they would hurt me, but you stood there and watched. You knew I was the one holding the safety net, and you let them try to cut the ropes. You made a choice. Sienna, you chose the fantasy over the sister. Do not call it an accident. Do not call it a misunderstanding. You chose them. I hit send. Then I blocked her number. I blocked my mother. I blocked my father. I did not block Miles. I wanted him to be able to reach me. I wanted him to know that I was listening, watching, and waiting. I walked over to the window. The snow was heavier now, blanketing the town in white. It looked peaceful, but I knew that beneath the snow, the ground was hard and frozen. I was not going to exact revenge with screaming matches or public scenes. That was their game. That was the game of people who cared about appearances. I cared about the ledger tomorrow. I would not be the daughter. I would not be the sister. I would be the majority shareholder. I would be the chairwoman of the board. I would bring the audit team. I would bring the forensic accountants. I would strip the Kincaid legacy down to the studs and expose every rot, every termite, every structural failure. And if my parents' house, their reputation, and their quiet luxury life still collapsed in the process, well, that was just the cost of doing business. I turned off the lights in the hotel room. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow was a workday. The holidays ended not with a whimper, but with a superior. January 2nd arrived, with a sky the color of bruised iron. The festive lights in Bend were coming down, replaced by the grim-gray reality of a Pacific Northwest winter. While my family had spent the week between Christmas and New Year's trying to call my bluff, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to veiled threats about legal action, I had been busy building a fortress. I sat in a rented conference room at the Oxford Hotel, a space that smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. Across from me, Elliot Crane was typing furiously on his laptop. We were not operating in the shadows anymore. The time for anonymous shell companies was over. The notice has been served, Elliot said, hitting the enter key with a satisfying clack. Extraordinary general meeting of the board of directors scheduled for tomorrow, January 3rd at 9 in the morning. Location Kincaid Micromobility Headquarters. Did they acknowledge receipt? I asked. I was reviewing a stack of printouts highlighting discrepancies in the inventory reports. Miles's secretary confirmed it 3 minutes ago. Elliot said they tried to push it to next week, citing scheduling conflicts. I reminded them that under the bylaws, a majority shareholder can convene a meeting with 24 hours' notice if there is evidence of fiduciary negligence. They folded. Good. I said my goal for tomorrow was surgical. I did not want to burn Kincaid Micromobility to the ground. That would have been easy, but it would have been wasteful. There were 200 employees who worked in the assembly plant. There were engineers who had spent years designing the battery systems. There was a product that beneath the layers of corporate rot was actually revolutionary. I wanted to save the patient. To do that, I had to cut out the tumor. And the tumor was the Kincaid family and by extension my own parents. We need to lock down the assets before we walk into that room. I said if Miles knows he's losing control, he will try to liquidate everything he can touch. Way ahead of you, Elliot said. I have drafted a standstill order. Once you formally take the chair tomorrow, we trigger a forensic audit. It freezes all accounts, all transfers, and all executive bonuses. But Savannah, you need to be prepared. When you freeze the money, you starve the beast. They are going to fight dirty. They already have, I said. My phone buzzed. It was a text message. Not from my parents this time. From Miles, lobby bar. 10 minutes. Just you and me. I have a proposal that solves everything. I showed the screen to Elliot. He wants to settle, Elliot said. He probably has a checkbook in his pocket. I'm going to hear him out, I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. Is that wise? I need to know what he thinks I'm worth, I said, and I need to see how scared he is. I went down to the lobby. The bar was empty at 2:00 in the afternoon, save for a few tourists drying out from the ski slopes. Miles was sitting in a corner booth. He looked rested, tanned, and impeccably dressed in a cashmere turtleneck. He did not look like a man who had been caught trying to steal intellectual property on Christmas Eve. He looked like a man who was about to close a deal. I sat down across from him. I did not order a drink. Savannah, he said, smiling as if we were old friends meeting for a catch-up. You look tired. Being a tycoon is exhausting work, isn't it? I am fine, Miles, I said. Make your pitch. I have work to do. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. Look, let us cut the drama. You pulled off a hell of a move. I respect it. Truly, you caught us sleeping. But let us be realistic. You are a designer. You do not want to run a manufacturing company. You do not want the headaches of supply chains and labor unions and regulatory compliance. I am a quick learner, I said. I am sure you are, he said dismissively. But why bother? You bought the stock to prove a point to your parents. Point proven. You won. Now, let us talk about the exit strategy. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a single sheet with a number written on it. I have lined up a private equity group, Miles said. They are willing to buy out Hawthorne Meridian's entire stake. We will pay you 20% above the current market valuation in cash, closing in 48 hours. I looked at the number. It was staggering. It was enough money to retire on. It was enough money to buy a private island. It was 8 figures of go-away money. 20% premium, I noted. That is generous for a company that you claimed was struggling with cash flow just last week. We found some liquidity, Miles said smoothly. So what do you say? You take the money. You go back to Portland. You live like a queen. Your parents get their dignity back. Sienna gets her wedding. Everyone wins. I looked at him. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for the tell, and I found it. It was a tiny pulse jumping in his jaw. He wasn't offering me this money because he wanted the company back. He was offering it because he was terrified of what I would find if I stayed. If I sell, I said slowly, then Hawthorne Meridian ceases to be the controlling entity. The audit I scheduled for tomorrow gets canceled. The books stay closed. We would handle the audit internally, Miles said. Standard transition. That is what I thought, I said. I slid the paper back to him. No deal. Miles's smile vanished. You are making a mistake, Savannah. You are letting your emotions drive the bus. Take the money. It is not about the money, Miles. I said, it is about the inventory reports. It is about the 60,000 units you claim to have but don't. It is about the shell companies in the Caymans. You don't have proof of anything, he snapped. I don't need proof today, I said, standing up. I just need to own the building. Tomorrow, when I walk in there, I own the servers. I own the filing cabinets. I own the shredders. You are not buying the shares. Miles, you are trying to buy a match to burn the evidence. If you do this, Miles hissed, his voice low and venomous, you destroy your sister. You understand that if the stock crashes because of your investigation, Logan loses everything. Sienna marries a pauper. Is that what you want? If Logan is innocent, he will be fine, I said. If he is not, then Sienna deserves to know who she is marrying. I walked away. I could feel his eyes burning a hole in my back. He hadn't offered me a buyout. He had offered me a bribe to cover up a crime scene. I returned to the conference room. Elliot was waiting with a grim expression. You need to see this, Elliot said. I did a deeper dive into that document your parents tried to make you sign. The restructuring agreement. The debt transfer? I asked, sitting down. It wasn't just debt, Elliot said. He turned his laptop screen toward me. Look at Clause 17 subsection D. It is buried in the definition of guarantor responsibilities. I read the legal jargon. It was dense, deliberately obtuse. The guarantor agrees to assume the title of Chief Compliance Officer for the originating entity, Rivero Kincaid Holdings, retroactive to the fiscal start date of the current tax year, and accepts full legal liability for all regulatory filings and financial disclosures made during said period. I felt the blood drain from my face. Retroactive, I whispered. If you had signed that, Elliot said, his voice hard, you wouldn't just be owing the $2 million. You would have legally made yourself the officer responsible for the fraudulent loan application your father submitted. They weren't just looking for a wallet, Savannah. They were looking for a scapegoat. I sat back, staring at the ceiling. The betrayal had a new, darker texture. My father and Miles hadn't just plotted to bankrupt me. They had plotted to send me to federal prison. They knew the loan was fraudulent. They knew the bank would investigate eventually. And they had set it up so that when the agents came knocking, Graham Rivera could point to a piece of paper and say, I didn't know. My daughter was the compliance officer. She signed off on it. My parents knew. I asked, did they know what that clause meant? Your father knew. Elliot said he had to. He signed the primary loan. He knew he lied on the application. He needed someone to pin it on. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, heavy and permanent. Any lingering guilt I had about ruining their reputation, any tiny voice whispering that I should be the bigger person was silenced. They had tried to frame me, their own daughter, to save their country club membership. Burn them, I said. Tomorrow we burn them all. My computer pinged an email from L. Kincaid personal subject attachment. I opened it. There was no text in the body of the email, just a single PDF attachment. It was a scanned document, a ledger of payments authorized by Miles Kincaid over the last 18 months. Payments to consultants that didn't exist. Payments for raw materials that were never delivered. Logan, he had come through. He was terrified. Yes, he was weak. Yes, but in the end he realized that the ship was going down, and he handed me the torpedo to make sure it hit the right target. We have the smoking gun, I told Elliot. Logan just flipped on his brother. That closes the case, Elliot said. With this, we can remove Miles for cause immediately. No golden parachute, no severance. There was a knock on the conference room door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Sienna stood there. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing a coat that looked too big for her, as if she had shrunk in the last week. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked in, looking at Elliot, then at the piles of paper. "I just wanted to see you before tomorrow," she said. "Dad told me about the meeting. He says you are going to ruin us." "I am going to save the company." I said, "What happens to the people who stole from it is up to the law." "Savannah, please," she said, tears welling up instantly. I don't know what is going on with the loans or the stocks. I don't understand any of it. I just know that my family is falling apart. Mom hasn't stopped crying for 3 days. Dad is scared. Sav, he is talking about losing the house. He should be scared. I said he tried to frame me for fraud. Sienna, she blinked. But no, he wouldn't. He did. I said I have the document. If I had signed that paper on Christmas Eve, I would be the one going to jail when this all blows up. Did you know that? Or did you just think it was about money? She looked horrified. I didn't know. I swear. It doesn't matter if you knew, I said. You were willing to let me sign it blindly. You were willing to let me take the risk so you could have your perfect wedding. I just wanted everyone to be happy. She cried. Why is that a crime? Why do I have to choose? I love Logan. I love Mom and Dad. And I love you. You cannot love everyone when one side is trying to destroy the other. I said, that is not love, Sienna. That is cowardice. She wiped her face. So what do you want me to do? Break up with Logan? Never speak to Mom again. I want you to pick a side, I said. Not my side, not their side, the side of the truth. If you walk into that boardroom tomorrow holding your fiancé's hand and pretending that nothing is wrong, then you have made your choice. But if you want to be my sister, you need to accept that what our parents did was unforgivable. She looked at me trembling. She was a child trapped in a woman's life, waiting for someone to tell her everything would be okay. I can't, she whispered. I can't just abandon them. Then you have your answer. I said, you better go, Sienna. It is going to be a long day tomorrow. She turned and left, closing the door softly. I watched her go. It hurt. It hurt more than the money, more than the betrayal. But the incision had to be made. The rot had spread too far. You okay? Elliot asked gently. I am fine, I said. I turned back to the table. Let us finish the motion to dismiss. The morning of January 3rd broke with a blinding white glare. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crisp and frozen. I dressed in a navy blue suit, tailored and sharp. I pulled my hair back. I'd put on my heels. As I checked my phone in the taxi on the way to the Kincaid headquarters, I saw the headline on the local news feed. Mystery billionaire takes control of Ben's biggest tech firm. Kincaid dynasty in crisis. As hostile takeover revealed the leak had happened. Miles had probably tipped the press, hoping to create chaos, hoping to paint me as the villainous outsider destroying a local legacy. He wanted a circus. We pulled up to the glass and steel building of Kincaid Micromobility. There were already news vans in the parking lot. Reporters were huddled near the entrance, their breath steaming in the cold air. I opened the car door. They wanted a villain. Fine. I would be the villain. I would be the bad guy who came in and wrecked the party. But inside that boardroom with the door locked and the evidence on the table, I was going to be the only righteous person left standing. I walked toward the entrance, Elliot at my side. The cameras flashed. The questions were shouted. I ignored them all. I wasn't here to give interviews. I was here to give notice. The boardroom of Kincaid Micromobility was a masterpiece of intimidation architecture. Located on the top floor of the headquarters, it featured 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the Cascades. The mountains were shrouded in a white mist, and the snow was falling harder now, turning the world outside into a blurred, silent void. Inside, however, the air was filtered, temperature-controlled, and thick with the scent of ozone and fear. I walked through the double glass doors at exactly 9 in the morning. I did not stop at the reception desk. I did not ask for a visitor badge. I walked with the cadence of someone who owned the carpet beneath her feet. Elliot Crane walked a step behind me, carrying a leather briefcase that contained the dismantling of a dynasty. The board was already seated. There were 7 members in total, mostly older men in gray suits who had been happy to collect their director fees while looking the other way. Miles Kincaid sat at the head of the table. To his right sat the current chief financial officer, a man named Henderson, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Logan was there, too, sitting at the far end, staring at his hands. When I entered, conversation stopped. The silence was instant and total. Miles stood up. He adjusted his tie, a reflex of nervous vanity. "Savannah," he said, his voice projecting a confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We were just discussing the agenda. Since you have called this a regular meeting, perhaps you would like to take a seat." He gestured to an empty chair on the side. I said. I walked past the empty chair. I walked past the board members. I walked straight to the head of the table. I stopped in front of Miles. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. The power dynamic in the room shifted so violently, it was almost palpable. The other board members shifted in their seats, looking from me to Miles. He hesitated for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like an eternity before his resolve crumbled. He stepped aside. I sat down in the chairman's seat. "Let the record show," Elliot said from his standing position near the wall, "that the majority shareholder is present and calling this meeting to order." I placed my hands on the cool mahogany table. "Proceed, Miles. You had opening remarks." Miles remained standing, hovering awkwardly near the window. He cleared his throat. "Yes. Well, as we all know, the last fiscal quarter has presented significant headwinds. Global supply chain disruptions, rising raw material costs, and the aggressive pricing strategies of our competitors have impacted our liquidity. The numbers look challenging, but I want to assure the board that this is a temporary market correction. We have a strategy to pivot." He was good. I had to give him that. He spoke with the fluid, meaningless jargon of a man who had been failing upward his entire life. He talked about synergy and optimizing workflows. He blamed the economy. He blamed the unions. He blamed everything except the truth. "We are currently negotiating a bridge loan," Miles continued, looking around the room for support. "It will stabilize our cash flow through the third quarter. We just need to stay the course." I waited until he finished. I let the silence stretch out again, letting his words hang in the air until they started to smell like what they were, garbage. "Are you finished?" I asked. "For now," Miles said, crossing his arms. "Elliot," I said, "the screen, please." Elliot connected his laptop to the room's projection system. The massive screen on the far wall flickered to life. It didn't show a PowerPoint presentation with bullet points. It showed a bank statement. "This," I said, my voice level and cold, "is a transaction record from the company's primary operating account dated December 24th, Christmas Eve." I pointed to a highlighted line. "Can you explain to the board, Miles, why $1.2 million was wired to an entity called Summit Logistics in the Cayman Islands at 11:00 at night on a holiday?" Miles went pale. "That was an advanced payment for lithium supplies to secure pricing." "Incorrect," I said. "Elliot, next slide." The screen changed. It showed the corporate registry for Summit Logistics. Summit Logistics was incorporated 3 weeks ago. I said it has no ships. It has no warehouses. It has no employees. Its sole registered agent is a law firm in Georgetown, and the beneficial owner of that shell company. The screen changed again. A document appeared bearing a signature that everyone in the room recognized. "Is you Miles?" A gasp went around the room. One of the older board members took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "This is not a market correction," I said, turning to look Miles dead in the face. "This is embezzlement. You have been siphoning operating capital into offshore accounts for 18 months. You created fake invoices for materials that never arrived. You used the company credit lines to pay for your personal real estate portfolio. And when the liquidity dried up, you tried to secure a fraudulent loan using my father as a proxy." "That is a lie!" Miles shouted. "That is interpretation. You are twisting the data. The data is not twistable." "Miles," I said, "it is math, and the math says you stole $4 million." I turned to the rest of the board. They looked horrified. They realized that their negligence was about to become a legal liability. "I am moving for the immediate termination of Miles Kincaid as Chief Operating Officer and Chairman," I said, "and the immediate termination of Mr. Henderson as CFO for gross negligence and complicity." "Seconded," said a voice from the end of the table. It was Logan. Miles whipped his head around to stare at his brother. "Logan, you are siding with her." Logan didn't look up. He was staring at the table, his face ashen. He knew he had sent me the file. He knew there was no defending this. "All in favor?" I asked. Every hand in the room went up except from Miles. "You cannot do this," Miles hissed. "My family built this company and your family almost destroyed it," I said. "Get out." Miles stood there for a moment, shaking with rage. Then he grabbed his portfolio and stormed out of the room. The heavy door slammed behind him, but the echo felt small. He was already a ghost. "Now," I said, "to the matter of leadership. We need stability. I am appointing Dana Hollowell as interim CEO, effective immediately. She has been running the European division successfully for 5 years. She is honest and she knows the business. I have already spoken with her. She is flying in from Berlin tonight." The board nodded. They were relieved. They saw a life raft. "And regarding the financial irregularities," I continued, "I am not handling this internally. We are a public company. We have a duty to the shareholders." I slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward the corporate secretary. "These are the forensic audit files," I said. "You will transmit them to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office by noon today. We are self-reporting. It is the only way to save the stock from being delisted." The room was silent. I had just ordered a criminal investigation into my own family's business partners. I looked at Logan. "Logan," I said, "you have a choice. You can stay on the board and help us clean this up. You can testify to what you know, or you can walk out that door and stand with your brother." Logan looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He looked at the empty chair where Miles had sat. He looked at the door. He was a man who had spent his life being told what to do, and now, faced with the first real decision of his life, he was paralyzed. He didn't speak. He did not. He just slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was staying, but he was broken, and I knew with absolute certainty that he would never be able to look Sienna in the eye again without seeing the ruin of his family. The wedding was collateral damage. I stood up. Meeting adjourned. I walked out of the boardroom. The air in the hallway felt lighter, but the day wasn't over. As I walked toward the elevators, I saw them. My parents and Sienna were standing in the lobby area near the executive suites. They had been waiting. They looked like refugees from a disaster, huddled together, dressed in clothes that suddenly looked too expensive for the desperate expressions on their faces. Sienna saw me first. She took a step forward, then stopped. She saw the look on my face. She saw the way the staff were looking at me with respect, with fear. "Savannah," she said. Her voice was thin. "Miles just walked past us. He looked like he wanted to kill someone. What happened?" "He is fired," I said, "and he is under investigation for embezzlement." My mother let out a small cry. My father leaned against the wall, his face gray. "And Malone?" my father asked hoarsely. "The agreement." I found the full text. "Dad," I said. I stopped in front of him. "Clause 17, the retroactive compliance officer role. You didn't just want me to pay the debt. You wanted me to go to prison for it." My father didn't deny it. He didn't try to lie. He just looked down, the shame finally outweighing the pride. "Miles said it was the only way," he whispered. "He said if we didn't give them a scapegoat, they would take everything, the house, the pension. We were scared, Savannah. So you decided to sacrifice me." I said, "We thought you could handle it." My mother sobbed. "We thought you are strong. You always survive." "I do survive," I said, "but that doesn't mean I don't bleed." I looked at Sienna. She was crying silently. "Logan is still in there. I told her." He sided with the board. He voted to fire Miles. Sienna closed her eyes. She knew what that meant. The Kincaid family was at war, and she was standing in the blast zone. "I am sorry," Sienna whispered. "I am so sorry, Sav." "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't rewrite the last week. You can build a new life. Sienna, you are young. You are talented, but you cannot build it on my back anymore. I am done carrying you." I turned to my parents. They looked small. They looked like strangers. "And you too," I said. "I have instructed the finance department to release a one-time payment to clear the mortgage on your house in Ohio. Not the mansion here, the old house. You still own it, don't you?" My father nodded. "Go back there," I said. "Sell the place in Bend. Pay off your personal debts. Live a quiet life." "Savannah," my mother pleaded, reaching out a hand. Please, we are your parents. Don't shut us out. We can start over." I stepped back out of her reach. "You invited me to dinner to ruin me," I said. "You handed me a loaded gun and asked me to pull the trigger. That is not something you start over from." I pressed a call button for the elevator. "Please do not come," I said, echoing the words from the note that had started it all. "Do not come into my life again." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. I watched them as the doors began to slide shut. My father defeated, my mother weeping, seeing her standing alone in the wreckage of her perfect dream. The doors closed. Severing the connection, I rode the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out the front doors of Kincaid Micromobility. The snow was falling heavily now, large flakes that dampened the sound of the city. The air was biting cold, but it felt clean. It felt pure. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was buzzing again. Reporters, lawyers, perhaps Miles trying one last threat. I held the power button down. 3 seconds. The screen went black. I put the phone back in my pocket. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself and stepped off the curb. I didn't have a destination. I didn't have a plan for dinner. I didn't have a family to go home to. But for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't something that was being done to me. It wasn't an exclusion. It was a choice. I walked into the white, quiet world, and I finally felt heard. Thank you so much for listening to Savannah's story. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please leave a comment down below letting me know where in the world you are tuning in from. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that like button so we can share this story with even more people. Thanks to all.